Corroboration from the book, New Discoveries in the Origin of Christianity by E. Walter. Circa 1900 of views expressed in previous videos and ideas built upon such views and upon substantiating evidence. Here we have the reason why the legitimate claimants to the throne of David called themselves messiahs. As Judas the Galilean claimed to be the legitimate heir to the throne of David, as we have before explained, he therefore claimed to be a born Messiah. In the time of the Opsamoneans, this word would have had no effect, for they were priests, hence they were also born messiahs. But in the time of Herod, who was but half a Jew and had no connection with David, this word Messiah had the signification of legitimate heir to the throne. And therefore Judas took up the word Messiah as a war cry under which to enlist Jewish sympathy with the restoration of the long-lost and much respected Davidian dynasty, and the Jewish autonomy, and as a matter of course, he called himself Messiah. The adherents to his cause were called qanna'im, zealous, i.e., zealous in the cause of the restoration of the right and legitimate heir to the kingdom of Judea, and in driving away all usurpers, such as the Herodians and the Romans. This, I think, is the most reasonable explanation why the word Messiah was adopted by these religio-political leaders as their title. Whereas we are now going to the Gospel, to prove that the new religion it treats of is the same as that which Josephus calls the fourth Jewish sect, and whereas the Gospel says their leader was Jesus, we must, therefore, first of all, answer the questions: who was Jesus? What about him and how did he become their leader? There is no human being in the world whose life has obtained such a celebrity as that of Jesus. It has been searched, studied and written over again and again many hundreds of times by various writers for the last 1500 years. Notwithstanding all this, there is less veritable history come down to us concerning him than any other noted person of his time. The professed original biographers bear on their very faces the marks of fiction and forgery. They have surrounded their hero from a time even prior to the cradle, the miraculous conception, to a time even past the grave, the resurrection, with myths and fables of the Greek and Roman superstition. A being half man and half God is a myth. A being whose father was a god and whose mother was a woman. We find plenty of such persons in pagan mythologies, but none in real history. By carefully examining old Jewish authorities, we find that Jesus was a grandson of Judas the Galilean. See Shabbat 104, Sanhedrin 67, Sukkot H 52. This explains all, and further remarks are unnecessary. But one thing I cannot restrain myself from remarking, that his biographers have erred greatly in stating that he was at war with his own nation, and that he is called the Pharisees hypocrites, vipers and serpents. A little common sense ought to satisfy any intelligent man that these anti-Jewish invectives are not the language of Jesus, but the vituperation of Jew haters of the 2nd or 3rd century, who put their slander in the mouths of Jesus and John the Baptist. As the history of John the Baptist is given by both the Gospel and Josephus, we make it a test case, to prove that the language we find in the Gospel claiming to be the words uttered by John, are not John's, but those of a Greek or a Roman Jew hater of the later ages, who personated the good man John to pour out his own venom under that disguise. The Gospel tells us that he lived in the wilderness. He was clothed in camel's hair and a leather girdle. His food was locust and wild honey. Thus we are treated to the description of a wild man, and his words of welcome to the Jews that came to visit him, as recorded in this story. O generation of vipers must be considered as a wild man's psalm. But is this true? We have noticed that Josephus says that the Jews were greatly pleased to hear his words, and is it possible that the Jews were pleased with a wild man calling them vipers? Underscored. Another objection to John's using these words is, that any impartial man examining the world's history of that time, will confess that the Jews as a nation stood much higher in the scale of morality and religion than any other nation of that time, and therefore it would be very wicked for any man to address them in the language we find in the Gospel. Another objection, the words attributed to John saying, "Begin not to say within yourselves, we have Abraham for our father," are not suitable in the mouth of a son of Abraham. The writer is evidently the son of a stoned Gentile who claims to be raised up by God as a son of Abraham. And now let us go to the Gospel. Nothing reflects so much on the character of the writers of the Gospel, as their silence on the most important events that transpired in Judea during the period of their narrative relating to the rise of Christianity. The Gospel treats of events that took place in Judea, from the time of taxing under Cyrenius to the very time of the breaking out of the Jewish war with the Romans. It is also claimed for these writers that they were Jews in Judea, yet they do not mention the word of the concussion of affairs that led to the downfall of the Jewish nation and the destruction of Jerusalem. But apart from the omission of the political affairs, the whole historical narrative of the Gospel is a complete enigma, for the Gospel claims to give an account of a new religious sect that originated in Judea with one Jesus the Galilean, giving the same description as is found in Josephus, that they increased wonderfully and rapidly, that almost all Judea grew wild with this new religion, and although it does not give us the name they were known by at that time, it tells us that they were afterwards called Christians. Acts 11:26. The reflections that suggest themselves are these: can it be possible that two religious sects, both by Galileans, different and distinct from each other, should have started at the same time in Judea, and, side by side, each should have increased so wonderfully, and yet one know nothing about the other? But the writers of the Gospel seem to know well about Judas the Galilean and his sect. Acts 5:37. But Josephus seems to know nothing about Jesus the Galilean and his sect. This strikes us forcibly. How is it that Josephus should mention one sect and not the other? Some Christians say that Josephus was biased, ergo, he does not mention the Christians. This is certainly not true, as every reader of Josephus can see that his dislike to the Zealots is very conspicuous, and yet he gives them a place among the Jewish sects, and mentions them several times in his history. After mature reflection, and careful analyzing and deliberating on the description Josephus gives of the Zealots, and the Gospel of the Christians, the unbiased scholar must come to this conclusion, that the Zealots of Josephus, and the Christians of the Gospel, are one and the same sect. We will conclude this section with two remarkable paragraphs from the Talmud Sukkah 52 commenting on Zechariah 12:10, and they shall mourn for him. In answer to the question, for whom will this mourning be? Some answer, they will mourn for the Messiah, the son of Joseph, that was killed. The commentaries on the Talmud say, that this Messiah was killed in the battle against the Gentiles that came to invade Jerusalem. The second paragraph is in loco commenting on Zechariah 1:20, and the Lord shewed me four carpenters. In answer to the question, who are the four carpenters? Simon the pious said, Messiah, the son of David, Messiah, the son of Joseph, Elijah and the just priest. Now who is this Messiah, son of Joseph, that we find mentioned here, but nowhere else in the Talmud? Surely, he can be no other than Jesus, who was the son of Joseph and was killed. Now if this Messiah, the son of Joseph, is really Jesus, and we cannot see any reason to the contrary, we learn from it two things. First, that there was no antagonism between Jesus and the Jews. Second, that Jesus was killed in battle, or, as we stated, he was captured in battle and crucified the next day. We have good reasons to suppose that Simon Bar Iona, the pillar of the church, is identical with Simon Bar, the pillar of the Zealots. Bar Iona, as we have said, means the son of a Greek, and Bar means the son of a proselyte, i.e., that his father was a Greek. What a light this throws upon what we read in the Acts of Peter and Paul apocrypha that Peter suffered martyrdom at Rome with his head downward, the very story told by Josephus of Simon Bar. Dio tells us that the Romans at Rome pronounced Pio for J, and the French today pronounce Pierre for Peter. Here we have a more rational explanation of how Simon got the name Pierre or Peter than what is given by others. We also find among the apostles a Simon Zealot. Luke 6:15. Judas Iscariot is an alteration evidently as a disguise, and the correct reading is in the Peshitta, Judas Iscariot, i.e., a Iscariot. Indeed, many narratives in the Gospel may be pointed out to be the same as in Josephus, with but a slight alteration. But probably the most remarkable person we see mentioned in the Gospel is Simon of Cyrene. Matt 27:32, Mark 15:21, Luke 23:26. This is the real name of the famous Bar Kokhba, and Mark adds, the father of Alexander and Rufus, and these are the names of Bar Kokhba's children, and therefore there is hardly any doubt but that it refers to that famous hero, and the words, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus, has a significant figurative meaning. And we, in our time, looking backward at the Christian historical record of 1900 years, in all its phases and changes, at all its evolutions and reformations, at its crusades and inquisitions, at the light it claims to have brought into the world, and the dark ages that it produced in the world, its sham civilization and its real persecutions, at the rivers of innocent blood that it spilt, and at the burning fires autodidate phase which it kindled, at its canonized saints, who, before the world, stand condemned as the most wicked sinners, at its inquisitors, whose god was Moloch, whose creed was murder and whose principle was Mammon, at its Jesuits, who, as their name implies, are followers of Jesus, to love their enemies' souls so well, and therefore to send them to heaven as soon as possible, and to love everything belonging to their enemies, and therefore to take possession of it, and keep it in trust forever. Who dare call this murder and robbery, since they claim to have the license for it from their God Jesus and their patron Saint Loyola? At its younger brothers, the anti-Semites, that Satan must have held a high carnival to celebrate his great achievement at the Rent trial, where his imps proved themselves the greatest perjurers of the present age? Well, the previous capture, taken together with multitudinous other quotes which are accessible digitally and in print, certainly makes it clear that the conspiracy to defame the meek, lowly, innocent Society of Jesus has included a great many seemingly independent authors and commentators of various backgrounds and from every century of the existence of the Jesuits. Why should God allow even his holy temple to be destroyed by the most wicked people, and be silent? The pious pessimist would reply, we have sinned against God, and thus he justly punishes us for our sin. But the intelligent Jew would tartly reply, if God is just to punish sinners, are we the only people that commit sin, or are we the greatest sinners in the world? I do not wish to justify ourselves, nor do I mean to say that we are not sinners, for who is there that is born of a woman that does not commit sin? God created us men and not angels, and to err is human. Look and behold the other nations around us, and see if they are not a great deal worse than we are. Look to Egypt, to Syria and to Greece, look at their abominations, their vices and their sins, and what shall I say of Rome? Is there a people in the world that is so steeped in sin as they are? Nay, in Rome vice and wickedness have become virtues, while virtue has become a vice. Go and behold all the abominations and filthiness that are practiced in Rome, which are not fit to be mentioned. But there is no need to go to Rome to behold their wickedness. Why, look here, they are here in our country. Is there any crime, any guilt which they are not the authors of? What are they here for? Is it for our good? Have they not robbed us of all our possessions? Have they not butchered our best men? Have they not violated our women? Yet they are the most prosperous nation in the world. But why has God destroyed his own temple? You must notice that this temple was the only one in the world that was erected to the true God, while the thousands upon thousands that are erected to false gods are standing in peace and prosperity. Has the temple sinned also, while the other temples have not? No, pessimist. No, it is not on account of sin that the lamb is destroyed by the wolf, neither is it on account of sin that the weak and innocent man is destroyed by the mighty ruffian.